All right, welcome everybody. My name is Elliot Prout. I'm the president of the Serenoa chapter, so glad to see so many people out today. We have kind of an interesting setup because Selby has a meeting at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, so they set up the meeting at the room ahead of time. I'm really excited for our speaker tonight, Sean Patton. Before we get to him, I have just a few quick announcements. First of all, the last field trip we did, Historic Spanish Point, was a record turnout for us. We had 37 people sign up. So we had 26 people register and 37 people show up. That's how you do it. Yeah. But it worked out because everybody that went, we had a microphone, and David Turner, one of our members, did a really good job managing that. We offer native plant grants to nonprofits, and our fall season just ended where we had all our applicants submit, and we approved four projects, I guess, for a native plant grant. And we increased our grant amount to $1,000. So we're going to be able to do some significant work with that as far as putting native plants in the landscape and some really cool projects, which we'll tell you more about in the newsletters. But one of them is like a restoration project out on Longboat Key, where they're removing a lot of invasives and putting in native stuff. So I think our next season opens up in January. So if you or anybody that has a nonprofit wants to apply, you can do that on our website. The Florida Environmental Film Festival is going on right now. It's going on virtually through the 23rd. And then they're also doing a live showing at the Selby Library on the 24th, a movie called Fighting for Florida, and it covers red tide. So that's available to anybody. It's free, and you can just register for that online. And then as far as tonight, we have Sean Patton, who's going to be our speaker tonight. He is a graduate of New College. He studied marine biology and ecology. He now teaches ecology at the Ringling College. He also founded Stocking Savvy, which is an environmental consulting firm. They do wetland restoration, retention pond restoration, all different kinds of stuff. On his website, it says that they've done over 2 million native plants and fish put back into the habitat with his company. He's also presented at the Florida Native Plant Society State Conference. And tonight he's going to be talking about aquatic butterfly gardening, which he literally wrote the book on. So if you notice in the back, we have some books that were co-authored by Sean and Kendall Southworth about butterflying with aquatic plants in Florida. And that will be the majority of the topic tonight, as well as some of the projects that he's worked on and managing wetlands and things like that as well. So thanks so much, Sean.
All right. So in aquatic plant management, you throw most of the usual rules out the window. And I can see the Selby staff in the audience already cringing a little bit. You really don't want to fertilize a lot. You're mostly dealing with too much growth. And you actually have to incorporate animals into your projects if you want them to succeed. So this is a new talk that I've been working on that a lot of people at the fan conference were big fans of, and I've even updated some images since then. Thank you, Jason, for this project. So this is one of the most famous images we have. This is actually of the newly installed floating island at the Bay Park in Sarasota. We have seen dozens of different species use it over the years. It has survived every single hurricane since we installed it in, I think, about 2020, 2021. And we have had several nests of ducks and birds on it. So anywhere you think, you can probably do wetland gardening. And the goal of this presentation is to help manage difficult aquatic ecosystems for the community, with the community, and by your community. Yay, this is one of the first community projects we did. You can actually see some of the first three savvy baddies, as they like to be called, Kendall, Piper, and Augustus. And this is a small retention pond in Sarasota. So there's a lot of different names for these areas. And I found that depending on where you are and who you're talking to, everyone has different descriptions for this. So I have come up with a basic description that covers most areas. Upland is anywhere that is not underwater anytime during the year except for during flooding. Riparian is between the high water mark of the year and the average water mark of the year. This tends to be the area where you get the most beautiful flowers. A lot of your hibiscuses, your crinum lilies, your spider lilies, oh my. Your emergent zone is going to be anything between the average and the low water mark. Your emergent vegetation tends to include things like pickerweed, duck potato, knotted spike brush, and golden can lilies. And many of these plants can grow higher as long as they have enough moisture, but not deeper. Depth is the biggest limiting factor for aquatic plants. And keep in mind, Florida is flat. We don't have a huge shift in our hydrology here, sometimes just a few feet. Other areas of the world, you can see this whole thing shift over 20 feet. And that's where I actually get to littoral zones. This is anywhere where, except for in droughts, it is usually underwater most of the year. Most plants need bare soil in order to reproduce and seed, and most plants like to grow in shallower water. These are the maximum depths, not the minimum. And littoral areas usually have things like water lotus, fragrant water lily, and many of your like spatterdock species, your newfallers. And so most aquatic plants like full sun because it's hard to have lots of trees and shade if you're in the water. But there are some ecosystems, especially cypress domes and oak hammocks, where you will see more of a shaded ecosystem. And this is also a really good opportunity to have epiphytes, which some of you might have heard of here at Selby Gardens. They apparently work with them. And a lot of your air plants, your orchids, your fern, like your tree climbing ferns, love these moist areas. They really like that air humidity. And there are some species that are only found in these wetlands, these very shaded wetlands. Lizard's tails are really important ground cover in a lot of areas. And I really like the bladderwort orchids. They're named after the aquatic plant Utricularia. And they are found in South Florida in many tree habitats, and I've worked with them a little bit, and they're pretty cool. And you will very rarely see littoral zones be shaded. It's very, very hard to grow anything there. There are some submerged plants that can handle it, but like fragrant water lily can sometimes handle it. I found Nymphaea jasmonia or Jameson's water lily actually really likes deep shade, but it can't handle this depth of water year round. It needs that hydro period. And I've been working a lot with that species down in the Wetland Park area. This is the best depth to plant. Unlike you land people, we don't have rulers, so we use gator, usually about 2 to 6 inches, with 4 inches being the magic number for a lot of different aquatic species, especially your lotuses, your pickerelweed. They love this area. And you can see the gator loves it too. And many aquatic plants are also planted bare root because it's harder to seed in the water. Your seed will do something called floating away, which doesn't really happen on land. Again, a lot of the rules are kind of different. And they also look pretty bad on install. Most of your aquatic plantains are not going to look good on install because they're extraordinarily seasonal. You tend to be using a lot of bare root cuttings, and you're oftentimes mass planting in mud. My projects tend to be a little bit bigger than 1 yard, but a lot of these management practices work well. This is actually for the field trip coming up this Saturday at Wetland Park, and we'll show you exactly how to get there at the end of this presentation. The biggest reason I'm hired to do aquatic restoration is not for wildlife, and it's not for algae, surprisingly. It is erosion control. So I want to lead with that. If you want to control erosion along aquatic areas, don't put a seawall in if it's freshwater. You never need a seawall in freshwater environments. There are some cases where to preserve existing historical structure you might use them, but I never recommend use seawalls in freshwater. Sometimes they're used in very specific circumstances in saltwater, and riprap is much better in saltwater and should not be used in fresh. We're gonna see why in a minute. Notice how here, this is in the town of Juno Beach, one of my clients. We have moved the seawall back. We have this really nice area so that no matter what happens with the water level, we know it's not going to be touching that seawall. We used a lot of clump grasses, your Fakahatchee, good lord, Fakahatchee, muley, your cord grasses are really good here. Terraces are better than walls. You slow down a lot of that erosion. Don't use turf ground covers. Don't use turf. Seriously, stop using turf grass. It is the fastest way to ruin an aquatic project. And you're going to see why in this presentation, why if you want to have a healthy Florida ecosystem, you cannot use turf grass. And I'll show you at Bowen Park too, where in areas where the development has put in turf grass, it is harder to manage your projects. They look worse. You save money by not putting in turf. This was a multi-million-dollar consulting firm that did some of the best irrigation and rock work I've ever seen. They do know their stuff. But Florida sits on sand and Swiss cheese. That is our ground rock here. Turf grass will never hold it in. They even have the drainage underground and it's still eroded out. And notice the riprap didn't do anything. They put a pile of rocks that are not holding in the air. This happens way more often than you think. You get washouts. People are building houses too close together and they're not accounting for how if you develop half of an acre and you have a rain event, you know that 1 inch rain is now 2 inches. And there was something called Hurricane Debbie, which dropped about 9 inches of rain in 2 hours, 1 hour. Yeah, it's going to cause a lot of erosion issues, and turf grass is not suited to keep up with it. This is a freshwater seawall after 50 years. Because people don't remember that the cost of a project includes the cost to maintain, and eventually you have to redo it. And with seawalls, because they could be over $1,000 per square foot, it will bankrupt communities when they do seawall and riprap projects and they have to go and redo them after 20, 50 years. Or if you skip on maintenance, you might have to redo it much faster. Living shorelines are actually the lowest cost per square foot of shoreline to maintain. Some people think they can get away with it through mad science and technology like erosion control structures and these underwater these underground like barriers like geotextiles and all that. But the rain will still push all the sand through them. Again, there are so many different agencies, multi-million-dollar agencies from all over the US who come to Florida and they do the same mistakes every single time. I am bored of those mistakes. Here is in the same community as a lot of those other mistakes, they had natural living shorelines. This is all cantaloupe. And there's some other weeds and stuff, but they had no erosion in areas where they're doing mass cantaloupe and cordgrass plantings. And guess what? It's a multi-billion-dollar community that does a lot of lakes and golf. And guess what? They're fine with this. If you want to see a really good example of this, Forest at Stony Brook has some wonderful examples of golf courses. I don't manage a lot of golf courses actively because they usually have their own in-house crews, but I do work with them and train their crews and give them advice. Some people might be like, Sean, I don't have a city on board. I have so many cities on board. This is the town of Joe Beach again, and they are slowly going through their landscaping, killing and removing turf grass, and replacing it with native restoration that they have volunteered crews to go through and maintain them. Sometimes it's worth temporarily raising taxes or money to do these projects because long-term you save a lot of money. Grass is very expensive to install and maintain. This is another local example. This is at the Bay Park. This is a no turf grass anywhere around the pond. We kept it away. And you don't want people walking into the water anyway. There are these things called gators and snapping turtles and crocodiles, actually. We have those in Sarasota too, in certain ecosystems. And this is a really nice planting where I did a little bit of pickerel weed, some knotted spike rush, and some duck potato in the deeper areas. You can see them a little clearer back there. Cantaloupe leaves at right where the water's edge meets the land. And this is a butterfly host plant, by the way. A lot of the plants in this presentation will be either butterfly host or pollinator plants. But it's more important to know how to manage the ecosystem if you want healthy butterflies. If you do want a ground cover to go under this, we use a lot of Bacopa caroliniana and Bacopa monieri. I also like frog fruit. Florida loose strength is excellent. Florida betony is good. And at the Oscar-Shervaxon expansion, which we help plant, there's some really excellent wood sage shorelines. So you have options. They can be walkable or no. But do know that walkable, mowable ground covers are always going to be harder to maintain. The mower will cause erosion at the edge, so the weight of the mower, again, you're driving on sand. They're gonna have more weeds because these ground covers tend to be, not as tall as a lot of the invasive species. And Florida betony is the only plant I have ever seen in the wild, and I have a few images of it on my iNaturalist, that I've seen outcompete torpedo grass. That is shorter than it. It's very good in established areas at preventing more torpedo grass intrusion, but it will not. But it will not take over and push out torpedo grass. Just holds it back. So I really recommend that if you need a walkable ground cover, use one of these, but try to keep people away from the water's edge, because if you mow all the time, you're gonna get erosion. That's very hard to deal with. I mean, if you have the opportunity to pick your slope, the shallower the slope, the less erosion you're gonna have. The second most annoying thing is invasive species and problematic species management, which does include algae. And a lot of fish will actually rip out your aquatic plants, they'll eat them, the turtles will eat them. And I have a lot of people being like, Sean, I want to do a little practice planting, like a test planting on this 100 feet of shoreline. And it's a 20-acre lake. If you have 2,000 turtles in that lake and they each eat one of your plants, you have no more test area. And I've seen many, many test areas fail because a lot of these animals are coming from nearby developments and they're hungry. They'll eat a lot of your plants. So I generally recommend at least one plant per foot of a lot of your bare root species and a lot of your shoreline species. But you can also use the community to help you. And homeowners are oftentimes viewed as a liability. They release animals and plants into yards. The dogs and kids mess up projects. Sometimes they spray stuff. A lot of times they hire cheap lawnmower groups like Mow and Blow, and they spread invasive species, especially torpedo grass and kogan grass, into your community. So now I recommend having the community work for you. We've held 2 fishing tournaments at Wetland Park, which is where we're going to go to the field trip. And do you know how fun it is to do invasive species management by having an army of children sabiki hooking cichlids out? You couldn't pay for that level of dedication. We offer prizes to people who caught the most invasive species. You can make it fun. You all want your jobs to be boring, go ahead. I use grappling hooks and armies of children with weapons. It's fine. They signed liability waivers, I don't care. And the boy on the left, you're right, I guess. He actually won the invasive species tournament and caught over 45 cichlids. We also had a local artist who I might be engaged to design that lovely fish measuring thing, Margot Ambiance. And you do a lot of education talking about these invasive species and the natives that they are replacing. We actually have at Wetland Park signage showcasing what we've stocked into the lake. We've done underwater plantings, circles and grooves. We've done shoreline plantings, and what you're going to see is that right at the water's edge, where all those most beautiful species are, has to be sprayed. It's the only thing I have to use herbicide on my accounts because there's torpedo grass in the turf. If you get rid of turf, you can actually do herbicide-free management. And in a lot of my wetlands, I do. But if you have a lot of these invasive grass species, you're gonna have to use herbicide in aquatic projects. We also have a jail cell built for the invasive fish, Wetland Park's Most Wanted. It was very fun. You can do a lot of good community education and management. And if you're wondering why I keep bringing up fish, invasive fish will oftentimes rip up or eat your plants, and native fish like the Florida flagfish tend to scrape algae off your plants and improve their growth and look. In a lot of my sites, like in Wetland Park, we do not spray for algae. We don't. And we use native plants and management like this, removing these invasive species, which is removing nutrients to control algae. You can entirely prevent algae on your sites. And if you do have a ton of algae on your site, something is out of balance. Herbicides are only needed for grasses and established large trees. Like if you have a Brazilian pepper forest, yeah, you're gonna have to spray some stumps, but at that point you got bigger issues. All other issues can and should be physically removed for best results to reduce eutrophication or adding of nutrients to the water and not harm your beneficial native plants. Again, the main thing you need to do here is control the growth of the invasives and promote the ones that you want. Once the natives are established, once the native plants are established, then you will have access to a very nice, easy to maintain ecosystem. This is Kendall, and she is our example of cultural control, where you work with nonprofits, Salvie Gardens, and other groups like the Science Environment Council, Florida Native Plant Society to interact and engage with the public. If your neighbors are being problematic, tell them to come here and have a fun talk. They can be your allies or they can be your enemies. It's a lot easier to do these projects if you have more of the community on board. Social control. This is direct actions between like a plant manager or whoever and working with the community. This could be your neighbors, this could be your family, this could be an HOA, and there are laws that protect people for putting in native plants that HOAs cannot override. And I have that exact statute at the end of the presentation if you so want. Physical control. By hand, by machine, by barriers or other methods, we remove or block the entry of invasive species. We removed 72 tons of invasive species from Grand Lake, and now we have no algae, because those invasive species sucked up all the algae, and we have saved a ton of money in long term. It was a little bit of money up front, but now we don't have the 60-foot bands of algae that Lakewood Ranch has struggled with. It works. And we have long-term data and photos that show this. Biological control. This is the flagfish of my operation, the Florida flagfish. It is endemic only to the state of Florida and a tiny bit of Georgia, but I don't count them. And it literally has red and white stripes and a little blue star. What better way to combat the red tide of algae than by using the American freedom fish to clean up your ponds? And it is native to any water body in Florida that is freshwater or slightly brackish. And we already do this in other ways, using the UF biocontrol like air potato beetles. But do you want to know why no one does this with fish? Because historically, all the waterways were connected. There were fish in every waterway. But then we did something called flood control. Now fish can't crawl across land, with the exception of the walking catfish and a few others. So don't I see you all trying to find holes in my presentation. Just enjoy it. But yeah, no, you have to put these fish in, because otherwise how are they going to get there? This is rocket science, fish science. And of course, Florida would be so extra to have a fish that looks like the American flag, because we are kind of a cool state. And the last option that you should do in conjunction with everything else is chemical control. I do not ban the use of chemicals because they are a tool. But if you're always using them first, you're going to get herbicide resistance, you're going to kill a lot of non-target plants, you will lower water quality. There's a lot of reasons not to use herbicide. But one thing we did here, this is the city of Lake Helen, another one of our projects. We scooped out about 95% of the invasive floating plants to, again, stop all that nutrients from re-entering the water. And then we spot sprayed anything that was left. We lowered our herbicide costs by a lot. In long term, it looks a lot better and the ecosystem is much healthier. So again, this is the order in which you should be tackling problems. Whether it's as a community, a government, a nonprofit, this is the best way. Chemicals are a last resort. Other tips and tricks. Because again, we do a lot of heavy lifting at Stocking Savvy. You can do a wetland anywhere. So this is that same wetland filled in a little more. We actually experiment and try different plants. The plant wanted to try different things. They wanted different flowers and stuff. So we are always trying new things on it. We also have, you can do wetland pots. This is one with some really nice savanna iris, crinomules, white milkweed, and dollarweed is an excellent ground cover. It's used by a lot of native amphibians. It will probably show up in your wetland ditch, garden, pond, or whatever eventually. And it's useful. It gets little flowers. I like to use it as a ground cover, and it's a naturally occurring one. The island base is actually covered in frog fruit. Frog fruit is a common ground cover used in Florida, but it also handles wet areas quite nicely. And I even have areas where it grows several feet underwater. There are different island types. I prefer it's a company out in California for the permanent installations where you're not harvesting, but we have a local producer, Beeman's Bee Mats, where if you are, say, working with a plant nursery, you're doing a lot of harvesting, or like routinely changing your island, like say you're doing exhibits, you want to use one of these bee mats because they have a lot of these nice pre-drilled holes, the roots go directly into the water. You have to have a little bit more water tolerant plants, but it's much better for harvesting and constantly changing the look of the island. And you can allow some stuff to grow across the entire base. A lot of like small sedges like Eliocaris baldwinia is actually really good to use on islands, and water it can be an issue. But a lot of the native fish that I've been talking about, like Florida flagfish, golden shiners, chub suckers, will go after that. Quite a few different salt tolerant species, some like a lot of your beach and dune species, your sea oats, your railroad vine, Jamaican caper. These guys can handle hurricane flooding, but they like to be a little bit more high and dry. We also get a lot of salt marsh species. White top sedge is another big one that I see in the area. We actually have one back there with the auction. And you can, a lot of our, even our freshwater species have more salt tolerance than you think, just because of how Florida is. So if you get a more coastal grower, you'll have more salt tolerance. And believe it or not, Florida has pipefish and stingrays that are entirely freshwater in certain areas. So Florida is a lot more different than people think. A lot of our saltwater species can actually handle our freshwater here because they're locally adapted. Get a good crew. So I have lots of photos of my crew that I like to use through this. They help set up events, they help do a lot of the physical removal, and it works. Sometimes it's better to just manage stuff in-house and pay a neighborhood kid to do this stuff. That's where a lot of these entry-level jobs come from anyway. And I actually help get a lot of my crew permanent long-term positions in Sarasota, in the environmental community. Because community is not found, it is made. I've also, and this is something I've done more with Selby Gardens, and they're the experts at it, but epiphyte restoration. We've done native epiphytes, whether they were, a tree obviously fell down, we just need someplace to put the epiphytes back up. Or we've been working with a lot of different institutions to get more epiphytes for these trees. Because a lot of these new developments are planting all these oaks and maples and magnolias next to these water bodies, but they don't come with the epiphytes. We don't get the butterfly orchids. We don't get the cardinal airplane, which is mostly found in wetlands. And resurrection fern loves these wetland trees. So yeah, we sometimes do need to stock and start a few of these wetland species, and I've been doing a lot of experimentation with that at the Bay Park in Sarasota. Oh, we finally dug down to the ditches. This is a Kendall for scale. This is some of the largest Thalia geniculata I have seen. And some of the flower stalks at one point were almost 20 feet tall. And Kendall is not short, she's about my height. So you can see this is really healthy. And when you're doing ditches, how many of you have a ditch in your yard? Just like a low depression that's like, keeping the stormwater out. Fireflag, golden cannel lilies, cordgrass, crinum lilies even, duck potato, white top rush, all do wonderfully in these ditches. And the bigger the plant that is not woody, the better. Fireflag is one of the few things that also helps to outcompete primrose willows, a really common invasive species in wetlands. And this is also a host plant for the Brazilian skipper butterfly. And so you can see that there's a lot of different ways, but again, I always come back to the biggest issue. The second you have to start using herbicide control turf at the end or at the edges of these ditches, you run into the same problems around your lakes and around your wetlands. You're going to get invasive species like torpedo grass. This is another area at the Bay Park where I was told, hey, we're going to be doing something with this, don't touch it yet. But the torpedo grass coming from this turf area is negatively impacting the part of the swale I did need to work in. It makes all management more difficult. So even if you do the bottom of the swale on one side of the ditch perfectly fine, if you still have turf grass on the other side, it's going to constantly creep into the wetland. And you can even see how it would be a lot nicer if it was symmetrical. But sometimes you have limitations, or maybe your neighbor just doesn't want to do it. And so this is why it's so important to get the entire community on board. Because unlike with a lot of standard landscaping, all waterways in Florida are connected via groundwater, via just porous soil, via canals, ditches, streams. You'll see them, like we have fens, we have swamps, we have wetlands, we have marshes, but I don't need to bog you down in all those different ecosystems. But you knew what kind of presentations I give. There's always bad puns. You all showed up anyway. Well, look, no turf. This is another angle, and you can see the floating island. There's a snapping turtle. You kind of see him here. He kind of bit through the steel cable, and the island pumped out. And sometimes we let the islands get a little weedy because we have certain species nesting on them. So she has been making my life more difficult, but I was able to get this nice shot. And in nature, you'll oftentimes see large mass plantings of muley grass or cordgrass. In fact, Hibiscus grandiflora, one of the largest flowers native to Florida, I mostly see growing in cordgrass meadows and floodplains. And it's a beautiful plant. If you want pink flowers bigger than your head, you're probably going to want some Hibiscus grandiflora for a grand old time. Baffling, isn't it? Once you get rid of all the turf, all these projects start to look better. This is a baffle box, and unlike turf grass, it helps to catch sediment and dirt that goes throughout different waterways. We have a nice path here and some educational signage, kind of blocked right here, that explains what the baffle box is. Baffle box. It's just a fun word. And this is, again, you can do a lot of different things. This is an example of a physical control structure that we use. And you can do the same thing with your plantings. So if you all have questions on specific plantings, specific spots, a lot of the rest of the presentation goes into individual species that I can pull up and you all can get notes on. But because I work from Pensacola to Miami, there's far too many wetland species to directly cover, like one by one. So I'm doing this more as an ecosystem and a community-based approach. A lot of our wetland species are butterfly hosts for pollinator plants. And if you plant the right host plants, you'll get them to come. If you want luna moths, you probably want to plant hackberries. They work very well around here. Like, what's someone's favorite butterfly? If you like a lot of the sulfurs, the yellow ones, you should plant beans. If you like monarchs, you plant milkweeds. And we have the aquatic and the pink swamp milkweed and the few flower milkweed that are all excellent wetland species. We have a website, we have a newsletter, we have a lot of social media, and literally wrote the book on it. Any books bought today, which are at the same price, actually a little lower than the price we usually sell them at online. Half the proceeds are going to Florida Native Plant Society, so definitely suggest grabbing one of those. I still have rent to pay. And it was written by, again, me and Kendall Southport. Definitely check out the Science and Environment Council of the Gulf Coast. They have a lot of different organizations that have helpful information. I am a greedy for-profit business owner. Why would I make all my own media and like handouts when I have all these lovely nonprofits to do it for me? And so I help work with a lot of them. And I also, my photos in it several times. I kept getting the back of my head to get Kendall's face, which was funny. But yeah, we helped write the Health Ponds Guide in the SEC. Definitely recommend becoming a member of FAN if you have a nursery or a professional, or joining the Florida Native Plant Society, which I know we have some new people here today. Yay, thank you for coming. Definitely recommend joining them. There's also iNaturalist, and I worked on the Sarasota Manatee Ecoflora project. That project page is still up. It might be reactivated at some point if Selby so desires. So I definitely recommend joining it and trying to get to the top of the leaderboard to see if you're the biggest nerd in Sarasota. And also I love the anime One Piece. Beats looking at turf grass. If you want to get in contact with me, if your community needs help doing any of this, my phone number, the business line is 941-500-2218. The website is Stalking Savvy. The email is stalkingsavvy@gmail.com. And we do anything aquatic based in Florida. And we've done everything from like new developments with miles of wetlands all the way down to small community ponds and HOA ponds. And yeah, it's nice. We get a lot of work for young professionals, and I'm very happy that we can do this to support. There are not many entry-level jobs these days. And especially in Sarasota with affordable living issues, we need to retain our young talent unless we want Sarasota to become another Naples. I don't like Naples, it's boring. So follow my advice or don't. You know, you just go look at my sites. You can see what's working. Because again, the biggest limiting factor for a lot of these wetland ecosystems is not what plants you're using, but what plants are going to be an issue. And this is, again, the Wetland Park. Different, it has a lot of seasonality and there's some really beautiful flowering periods. We're doing some really cool research at Selby Gardens down there to be announced at some point. And yeah, I can now go into specific species that we work on, like plants or animals. This is just a few of the different species we work with. I'm happy to say that we now have a vendor for bulk bowfin, amia, and gar, some of the more rare and niche aquatic species. We've been working to generate that for many years now. And we got Florida flagfish, chubsuckers, cooter turtles, shiny pike. We worked with a few local gardens and nurseries to get American lotus back to the trade. The main person growing and selling it passed away during COVID, so we want to make sure that plant stayed in the trade. And we use something I call multimodal biological control. We're using native plants and native fish and invertebrates to prevent all the issues with wetland management. And when you do it right, you have no algae. You have a relatively low maintenance environment that, in my opinion, is easier to maintain than traditional landscaping. But you have to get rid of the turf grass. There's no other way around it. And guess what? There is a state statute that protects you from doing that. It is section 373.185, where as long as you're doing native, edible, or drop tolerant landscaping, HOAs can't tell you not to do it. If they own the property, well, they can, but nothing's stopping you. If you're, and check, especially older neighborhoods, your property lines probably go to the center of the lake. And if you want, I'll check it for you. It's very fun. Right plant, right place. Remember, depth is the biggest limiting factor. And my motto, if it's not native, it's not edible, you're not using it for anything, don't plant it. Or as I like to say, if it's not native or edible, it's garbage. Good Boston accent. Flowering plants for every season. Believe it or not, most things don't bloom year-round, and all the best bloomers are not year-round. You want those seasonal bloomers, your hibiscuses, your zephyr lilies. They are very seasonal and very beautiful. Also, plant multiple of each plant. It encourages reseeding, promotes their respective wildlife. If you want to have butterflies in an area, you need, in my opinion, at least 5 of that plant. If it's something like milkweed, which naturally is not very common in landscapes, space them out. If you plant them all as a clump, they're all going to get destroyed. But certain host plants like milkweed are not common in nature, so you shouldn't focus only on that. In fact, a lot of your wetland trees, your shrubs, and your grasses are far more important. And skipper butterflies eat a huge variety of wetland grasses. So again, Elliott's love grass is one that I see a lot in South Sarasota. It's very common in some of the bogs down there, and it can handle some deeper water. We also have native sugarcane that I hope to enter trade at some point. They can get quite tall and beautiful. I've seen some higher than 12 feet tall. Remember your layers, trees and shrubs. You don't always want to plant a giant tree right next to your pathway. And if I see any of you planting bougainvillea next to a pathway, I'm going to be angry. I might yell. I hate that. You want to do a diversity. Pick an ecosystem and mimic it. I even work in some areas, like if you check my naturals, you'll see in Orlando, I have a site where the main ground cover is Drosera or sun dews. Thousands of them per square foot. It's very cool and also very sticky. And yeah, the rest is just specific plants. I can talk about anything you want, answer questions, but thank you all for coming out tonight. Yes.
When you're talking about depth, and I'm thinking about things like littoral shelf or how our ponds and flooded areas are going to change seasonally, can you talk a little bit about like what your like ideal planting times for those areas would be? Like right now it's winter, so we can access that stuff, but also it's not gonna rain here again until May. And when like we're talking about water depth, like seasonally, like give context for that?
Yeah, so we'll use the white milkweed as an example because it is a very seasonal dependent species and it can grow in deeper water, but we'll start in June. Like December through February is usually the middle of winter. That's when most wetlands are going to look pretty poor. Most things are dormant. Wetland species are very reliant on the rainy season. And this is actually where a lot of wetland plants are just sitting there dead and their seeds are slowly falling out. And they need that bare ground to reseed. All wetland milkweeds need bare ground to seed. They will not grow in water. Even just an inch deep is too much for those seeds. So you want bare, moist ground. Once you hit March and April, you'll start to see a lot of your wetland tree species mostly. Bloom. Maples are really big for that time. And they like to seed again before the rainy season hits, but they're big enough plants where they can, like, they have the nutrients to seed at the beginning of the season. May is usually, late May is when the rainy season starts. This is when you see a lot of your wetland plants really start to come up. And your main growing season is May through usually September, I would say, and that's where the water level starts rising very quickly. So any plants that are small, like milkweed, if they haven't they seed out in the end of fall and winter, and they start slowly growing through that time. And as soon as those big rains hit, they aren't at least started, because once the rain hit, they'll grow fast. If they aren't started, they won't grow anymore. And then you hit late September, October, November, and this is, fall. This is when a lot of our wetland species are blooming. They've gotten all that rain and nutrients. In the height of summer, some species like hibiscus are going to be blooming, but they'll carry their seeds for very long amounts of time. So it really is very species and ecosystem dependent. What I was just doing is go to a native ecosystem that you like looking at, like a swamp, bog, fen, marsh, take your pick, and mimic it. Look at what looks like your yard. And if you want, more specific advice, each plant in the book I have back there has specific depth requirements. It talks about what soils they like. And it goes into a little bit more depth than like the Florida Native Plant Society database. Because again, one of the biggest factors for these wetland species is their maximum depth. Almost all wetland species can grow in mud, but many, including water lilies, even grow in mud, but they can't grow deeper than a certain point. Water lotus is one of the deepest growing emergent plants, or a plant that grows from the ground to the surface. They can grow, I've seen them 13, 14 feet deep. Some plants can grow underwater, and then as the water level's lower, they flower. Cardinal flower can do that. That's actually a unique thing about cardinal flowers. Like when rivers are really high, oftentimes cardinal flowers grow underwater, and as the waters go back down in the fall, then they start blooming. You'll also see things like Vallisneria grow entirely underwater, and then they send flowers up to the surface, and they're pollinated by wind and wave action. Or in some places, there's research showing aquatic copepods pollinate flowers underwater. That was proved with seagrass recently. So yeah, underwater butterflies essentially. So they're crabs. Long answer to that question, but did that answer? April is usually the seeding. You can do, I recommend as early as you can when there's no more water. Like as soon as you have a lot of bare ground, start seeding. Some plants have 120-day dormancy, especially farther north Florida, and some only have a 60 to 30-day like cold stratification dormancy, especially in like central Florida. And South Florida, it's almost tropical, or whatever. Kill it first. So if you were having, if you have a lot of torpedo grass, you're gonna have to do something to manage it. You can shade it out, like really deep forests can shade it out. You can do things like cardboard sheet mulching and stuff if it's a little drier. In aquatic environments, though, they found that even if it's deep enough, I've seen torpedo grass grow over 6 feet deep. If it's deeper than 6 inches, the herbicide doesn't translocate or go into the roots. And so we found that if you cut it at the base of the water, especially in like 2 feet or deeper, it has a lot of trouble growing back, actually about the same rate as herbicide use in shallower areas. So what I do is I spray grasses in very shallow areas, just because otherwise you're going to be dealing with it forever. David Moore on his sites has found that a Mazapir followed by 2 follow-up glyphosate treatments gives you a 99.9% kill rate, but you can't use that in your big trees and shrubs, because a Mazapir will kill them. Again, this is why I hate turf so much. It's so hard to deal with. And I actually have to send plant crews and the insane people who work for me with sickles into deep water, and we're cutting at the roots and we're removing them. And if you would like to, and we will show you when on the field trip at Wetland Park, where we've done physical removal and where you've done herbicide removal side by side. So you can tell me which one looks better. because physical removal is usually the way to go.
So what do the numbers look like? When you look at the map, it looks like a zillion ponds that that map shows. So how many of them are good and how many of them are bad for such a place?
Way too many bad ones, especially like some of the Department of Transportation ponds, just because they're messed with all the time. They're right next to all the roads, so you're gonna get water runoff. They tend to have a lot of invasive species too, because again, they're flood water control structures, so you get a lot of hydrilla and stuff. Fun fact, hydrilla cannot be destroyed or removed from a water body by chemicals. Nothing targets the leaves, tubers, and they have a unique structure called the turion. But large carp, like the biocontrol grass carp, is the only known way to permanently remove them from a water body. There's a lot of regulation around them because they can be invasive, but yeah, it's pretty annoying. I have seen some areas do very high quality lakes. You want to know the main reason they look so good? They never put turf grass around it. If you're putting turf grass around a pond, I assume your brain is as smooth as that turf grass is. There's no structure, it's just inviting invasive species. It's not even pretty. Like, we fought a war against the French and they invented lawns. There was a French prince, the first guy to publicly brag about his lawn. He put it in a rich, very rich society newspaper. He was like, "Behold my wealth. I am so rich I need not leave my land wild for game and hunting, nor do I need to use it to grow crops. I'm so wealthy I can waste my land." And now it's required in some areas. The insanity. I thought we were doing freedom gardens in World War II. What happened? It's insanity. No, the #1 crop grown in the US feeds no one, is not good forage for animals, and literally was made by someone we fought a war with. I thought we liked going to war. Why are we doing this? It's insane. Any other questions? I can rant about turf all night, but I know you all probably want to talk about other plants, like native ones.
And you don't have a water spring source or anything like that, can you create any space for plants to have a garden like this? Or area?
Yeah, as long as it's like a lower depression, I've seen random wetlands pop up in lawns. It's kind of funny. As long, like a lot of our wetland plants, including like the bog buttons, some of the camphor weeds, even a lot of our like salt marsh hibiscus, they like to have water like slowly drain into them, but they like well drained soil. So again, you kind of want to look for the low parts of a property, and if you see some of these certain species like pennywort popping up, if you see things like bacopa popping up, you look for those native species. They can oftentimes tell you if that might be a good spot for a wetland, or even a seasonal wetland. And some wetlands you can, manage through mowing. Just you either need to put your mower much closer to the ground, especially for those wide sloped areas, or if you ever want carnivorous plants, it's a good way to manage those. Like sundews, fly traps are not native to Florida, but it works for them too. Butterworts, I find that management goes pretty well. Or you raise it higher if you want certain species like white top sedge, and you cut seasonally very specifically. You don't want to cut when they're flowering. And sometimes cutting a month or two before they flower, like the seaside goldenrod, you can get more blooms and not have them become 18-foot tall giants that then fall into all your pathways.
So what if you don't have any of those low spots with, wetlands? Can you dig out low spot? And how big should it be?
So the main thing I recommend there is plant what your site is suited for. If you have scrub, don't build a whole wetland, but one thing I will recommend that is very much needed is a ground level. It has to be flat with the ground, small pond. You can use those preformed ponds, you can use like a little pond liner, because that's actually something missing from a lot of ecosystems, especially in urban areas, is reliable access to small amounts of fresh water. And you can get mosquito fish for free from mosquito control, and you can get flatfish from me pretty easily. They're even sold by a lot of pet stores. Actually, the reason I have access to so many is they're from the pet trade. A lot of Florida aquatic species are actually in the pet trade, so I can do the projects that I do. I have a special exemption from the American Association of Zoos and Aquariums to help access a lot of this stuff in bulk. And I'm helping other institutions do it as well, so I can go do other cool projects, because I don't want to do this forever. I will also keep trying to rotate this in the background. We all know Coreopsis, but you'll also see like some species have a land form and an aquatic form. And so Bacopa is one of those. And so in a small pond like that, you can use Bacopa as ground cover around it. And then as it grows into the pond, it can form branching three-dimensional structure. Great for fish, great for amphibians especially. And raise your hand if you like mosquitoes. Yeah, no one does. And guess what? You need fish in these ponds. You need dragonflies, and they all die to copper. And copper is grandfathered in as an algicide. If you put copper into a water body, it kills all invertebrates and most of your algae and some plants. And mosquitoes do their whole life cycle in 5 to 30 days. Anyone know how long it takes dragonfly, the main predator of mosquitoes, to do their life cycle? Because they also have an aquatic and a flying form. How about a number? 2 years? It is 6 months to 5 years, depending on the species. So if you're using like copper-based algae management, you will get more midge flies. You will get more mosquitoes, and I don't like you.
That wetland area, or keep it wet using like well water?
I don't recommend that because that's going to increase your nutrient and mineral loading. Like you're going to get a lot of that stuff. So let it go dry. A lot of these species, again, they like that seasonal ebb and flow. Why waste all your water filling up a place that doesn't want to be full? Just plant species that bloom at certain times and make sure you have a ground cover and it'll still look nice. And guess what? In a lot of water bodies, crayfish and gators will have either wallows for the gators or burrows for the crayfish that fish can overwinter in. You can actually have fish survive sites that dry out. And I've done it before. It's not easy to take photos of that because it's all underground, but I mean, it's kind of easy to do. And in fact, you know those blue crayfish you see in pet stores? That's the native Florida crayfish. We have blue lobsters running around. It's so cool. I get those in bulk too. It's crazy. Goodness. Yeah, so what kind of tree do you want? Or what, like, it's usually you want to help define questions. So like, it's just all wetland trees, we could be here all night. Do you have a specific area or something in mind? All right. Oh, Southern live oak is probably one of the most classic wetland species, and actually, like, they're overplanted these days, but they used to be. It's loading. I'm not a tech guy, so I might have overwhelmed it. Oaks are a classic wetland species. You'll see oak hammocks in Mayaca that are natural. They're great for epiphytes. If you want a lot of epiphytes, like orchids, air plant, like native bromeliads, things like that, live oak. I'm not going to recommend anything better than that. But if you're in like saltwater areas, like white mangroves are gorgeous. Red mangroves are really good for saltwater erosion control. Buttonbush is a large shrub that I love. Can't plant it near livestock. And I actually have photos of pink buttonbush down at Wetland Park. I actually go through a little bit of a pink phase, and I see a lot of different coloration in that area because it honestly feels like boggy pine rockland habitat. It's actually very similar to pine rockland. It's not really been described that way because it's just such a niche part of Englewood that a lot of people have not been working on. If you have erosion issues, or you want like nesting birds, and this is also a host plant for several things, you can't go wrong with cypress. And if you're worried about the cypress knees in mowing, cypress knees only come up in areas that are really waterlogged. If you have well-drained soil, they're not going to put up knees. They put up those knees to breed. This is the single best plant for erosion control. Bald cypress has some mild salt tolerance. Pond cypress does not. And in my opinion, pond cypress is underplanted in a lot of projects, especially when you're more inland. And the maples are really good. They're a mainstay in a lot of ecosystems. In some parts of Florida, you'll see things like glades hammocks, which are primarily like magnolias. So you'll have your Sweet Bay magnolia, your grand southern magnolia. I also really like loblolly bays. They're another really beautiful wetland tree. Most people don't have a ton of room for a lot of different wetland trees, but many of them are quite gorgeous. Like swamp tupelo is really nice. If you don't mind, like if you're fine with larger shrubs, we have quite a few azaleas. Those swamp azaleas, the only one that really grows this far south, and it's difficult. It can handle seasonal inundation. So like some plants are fine being permanently in deeper water. Other plants like to be in, like they like to have that ebb and flow, like their roots need to be exposed. Cypresses can be underwater for decades. I've seen some cypresses planted in Orlando that are over 20 years just completely underwater. They're doing fine. They're not the happiest, but they're fine. Like they're growing and they're doing their stuff. If you're looking for, sorry, could you repeat what you asked? Let's see. This presentation will load a little faster. Put too much into it, I think. You can also look at hackberries are a really underutilized one. Great Sanderson, all those good magnolias. You want to see good loblolly bay, go to Lake Manatee State Park. There's some really good stuff out there. There's also a lot of good ferns. Swamp fern is very aggressive. Leather fern will make its own natural floating islands. And in some parts of like North Florida, you'll see bulrushes, cattails, and ferns flip over, and carnivorous plants are on the underside of the root systems, which is really cool. It's loading. Horsetails are really like with Equisito, Hymelia, or like common horsetail. This is really good for erosion control in areas that are moist but well draining. It does great in a lot of like planters and stuff. It's commonly used. Let's see. I don't have that many trees in this presentation. I might add more for future talks. But yeah, coastal trees that I really like for a lot of wetland restoration are Florida strangler fig. You got your West Indies mahogany, which can handle saltwater inundation. It's one of the few trees that can. That's not a mangrove. Buttonwood is really good. Again, it can handle some inundation. And if you're living in the coastal area and you want a good tree, white mangrove is always going to be one of the showiest ones. And of course, like there's new stuff coming out of South Florida all the time. So pay attention to what Selby sometimes has their plant sale. So go Sweet Bay, especially Tom and Richard always have new crazy stuff.
My retention fund's been around for quite a while, and I've had a couple of landscapers say, "Oh, you need to dredge it."
So it is the fate of all freshwater bodies to eventually fill in, unless you have rivers that are eroding them out and carrying those sediments to sea, or glaciers. How many glaciers do you have in Florida? None. And we got rid of most of our river ecosystems to make retention ponds, because I like to play video games, and that's hard to do with 2 feet of water in your house. So you do need to dredge at certain points, but there's different ways to do it. The only time I recommend a hard dredge where you're pulling out all of that is if there's like long-term sediment buildup or polluted soil, which copper sulfate applications can. I've seen communities near bankrupted because they were applying copper on their lakes for decades, and it made their lake bottom so toxic nothing could grow. It was labeled as a brown site. That doesn't sound good, and it's not. It's a brown site. You can also do as a slurp gun, where you're like slurping out a lot of like vegetation and goo. That's a lot cheaper than dredging, and you can actually look at its only organic material. You can get exemptions to permitting, which makes it a lot easier for companies to do, and they will lower your cost for that. My company does everything but large-scale earth moving and large-scale herbicide application, so like we can connect you with companies that do that. And the last way is actually a lot easier. It's where you use biological controls. So things like crayfish, bottom feeding like native, carp and catfish, they will help keep and reduce your buildup of muck. And if you have some really serious muck buildup, you can also use digesting bacteria that are sold in the trade. And they work well as long as you're not applying copper, because copper kills anything without a backbone. So grow a backbone and stop putting copper to for in your lakes. I hate that. Questions, comments, concerns? These are some of the honorable mentions, which does include some more trees. Willows can grow deeper than any other tree I've ever seen. I've seen them grow over 30 feet deep and live. The city of Lake Helen has some examples of that. Dahoon holly is a very low nutrient requiring tree. It does pretty well in development fill. I've seen it grow in limestone. It looks similar to Brazilian pepper, but it's native and doesn't make my life hell. So plant Dahoon holly. You also got your pond apples. They're a small tree or shrub that is our only native Annona or sour sauce species. And they're also known as gator apples because gators like to eat them too. Turns out fruit and meat are pretty easy to digest, so a lot of carnivores will eat fruit occasionally. There's lots of great YouTube videos of them jumping up and gators eating oranges or pond apples out of trees. It's very fun. Pines are surprisingly water tolerant. Even outside the pond pine, I see a lot of South Florida / growing in true wetlands and bogs, especially those that don't get burned often. And it's a really, really cool plant. I do recommend planting /pine. A lot of species rely on it. And if you have a dead tree in your property, how many of you see those annoying tussock moth caterpillars, the spiky ones? Have they landed on the back of your neck and stuff? You're like, ow, hurt. The main thing that eats them is something called a warrior beetle. They mostly eat spiked caterpillars like that, but the beetle's larva only eats dead wood. We have several dead trees in my yard, and I have the beetles there, and the tussock moth caterpillars are very rare. Meanwhile, at Ringling College of Art and Design, where they have removed every single dead tree, the tussock moth caterpillars form such a carpet that maintenance has to deal with it with pressure washers and sometimes shut down a building for a day or two. I would rather have a dead log somewhere on the property than so many venomous caterpillars that you have to get pressure washers so people can enter buildings. Plant native, keep the ecosystem like it was originally, and it will be easier. Please stop putting turf grass. Any other questions? I see any of you touch turf from Home Depot. Not talking to you ever again. Not after this.
Really low right now.
Mhm.
A lot of push down, a lot of milkweed, and it's just like, down. Salty grass, it's been with that.
Oh, sawgrass. It's really important habitat, but it sucks if you have to maintain it. Like I did. I recommend sawgrass for more natural areas. I would not put that in a yard ecosystem. There are other rushes again, like the white top rush, giant bulrush. You do have to be careful with certain species. Cattails and giant bulrush are some of the few non-woody plants that can block water flow. So if you put too much bulrush into a ditch, it can cause flooding issues. Cattails the same way, and anything woody. That's why I like to use the canna lilies, the fireflag, your hibiscuses, your grasses, or ground covers, because they are not going to block water flow.
Cut them back.
I would cut them back seasonally, usually like late winter, right before you see things starting to regrow. Because a lot of insects and your pollinators winter over in this dead stems. They cut their way in and use it as like a little house, or they live in piles of dead leaves. How many of you have ever seen a Luna moth in Sarasota? The adults don't drink nectar, so no flowering plant will ever attract them. You need two things: their host plant, which includes hackberries, a wetland tree, and dead leaf piles. That's what they cocoon in. If you don't have those two things, you'll never have a Luna moth. And so remember when kids were complaining about raking the leaves? They were right. Don't rake the leaves. You leave them right there. And guess what? If they kill the turf, so be it. Any other questions, comments, concerns? You want more jokes? I don't want to rush to the end of the presentation, but I like living on the sedge. So ask me anything. Oh, my students pay for this. Fun is not only mandatory in my class, but heavily encouraged. And again, you want a lot of these sedges, rushes, and grasses, oh my, because they help hold up your wildflowers. I've seen far too many people plant hibiscus or coreopsis or milkweeds, where it's just like an ugly stem sticking up. The reason they look like that is so the grasses support the flowers and the leaves and help hold everything up. If you don't have enough grasses or rushes, it's not going to look good. And I actually have some professional installations where all the flowers are laying down. I'm like, why? Sucks. No, we can do better. And honestly, mimicking Mother Nature tends to be right. And for people who don't agree with that, well, their projects don't look as good as mine. Planting ferns, I had a fern feeling when I come back to this. Honestly, firefly is one of my favorite plants. If I had to pick one plant to recommend for almost any area, it'd be firefly. Bird's nest in it, butterfly host plant, great for water quality. Cardinal flower is great farther north, and a lot of people really don't know that it is sold in the aquarium trade. You can grow it underwater, but it will only flower when the water level goes down. So again, a lot of your aquarium plants are actually Florida native plants. It's like I think 20% of the entire aquarium trade of Florida natives are endemics. It's kind of cool. I was a fish nerd at first. I know that's kind of like heresy in this room, but I like fish, so it's good. This is again Vallisneria. You can see that it has these fun corkscrew flowers that go to the surface. And if you're planting underwater plants like your Vallisnerias, your Caras, your Luigias, it's actually water clarity. That is your biggest limiting factor, not depth, because as long as they get sunlight, they can grow as deep as they want. And some plants that can tolerate deeper areas have, again, limits, like cypresses. If you plant them too deep and they're not getting enough air to their roots so they can't get those knees up, sometimes they will drown out unless you put them in big enough. Sometimes you can use an oversized plant to get something to grow where it normally wouldn't. Kind of like how if you see a kid drowning in the deep end of the pool, you send a 6-foot person and not the 3-foot person. Sometimes it's just size and logistics. I don't keep making bad jokes until you all either take me off the stage or ask more questions. Yeah, anyway. Oh, perfect. So, a lot of the hibiscuses, I do want to talk about this group for a second. Hibiscuses have over 26 different butterflies and moths that use them as host plants. And there's quite a few different hibiscuses. I have back there the hibiscus grandiflorus, and because I like to sleep in, I very rarely get to see the photos of the flowers open. A lot of morning glories and hibiscus are open in the morning to midday and then close midday to evening. So it kind of depends on your species. We've been testing a few different plantings at the Bay Park with salt marshmallow being one of the best ones for salt areas. If you're in North Florida, pineland hibiscus is pretty good. And again, a lot of these guys can tolerate up to 2 inches of depth, but their seeds need to be on bare soil. So again, just because they can handle more depth when they're bigger, doesn't mean they can handle that when they're smaller. And one of the most used of the trade is scarlet hibiscus, which also has a funny story. The leaves look like what most people think marijuana leaves look like. So someone called the cops on a nursery in Mayaca, and they raided the nursery, and the guy was like, "What weed has flowers that look like that? What marijuana has flowers that look like that?" And they apologized and they laughed, but it was very funny. And this has, again, it's one of the larger flowers in Florida. It's about the size of your face. What do you think looks better? That and 26 different species of butterfly? Or turf grass with dead spots from chinch bugs and dogmeat? We can make the world look like whatever we want, and all it takes is enough willpower. And I have more willpower than they do. And so we're going to start putting in some more natives, and they're going to love the butterfly gardens, and it's going to be fun. Stop putting in turf grass. Oh. This is the pickerel weed of the litter. This is one of the most commonly used wetland plants. It can grow up to 3 feet deep, but it will do just fine in mud. It has beautiful purple flowers, and its close relative is water hyacinth, one of only 7 federally banned plants. In fact, if you want a fun story, look up the American Hippo Act, where the vice president in a tie 50-50 shot down, importing hundreds of hippos from Africa and releasing them into the wilds of Florida, Louisiana, and Georgia to control water hyacinth before the invention of herbicides. Herbicides were not invented for the Vietnam War. They were invented to control water hyacinth, and before that, we thought about hippos. You think it's hard to get around Lakewood Ranch now? Imagine a herd of hippos running up and down the streets. I see you all laughing, but maybe you too. Oh, hippos only kill thousands of people a year because they're restricted to Africa. Egypt formally declared a war on them during like the ancient Egyptian period. There are murals dedicated to fighting hippos. And they brought hippos over to deal with a plant that looks just like the native one. It's not native and it's not edible. Why are you planting it? Stop making my life hard. I am a lazy millennial and you are trying to make me cut turf grass and deal with hippos. No. Stupid. It's not rocket science. I do make an exception for botanical gardens because you all know how to deal with invasives and it's good to come to places like this and research. But the average homeowner, honestly, actually 99.99% of homeowners just stick to that rule. The Sagittaria group's another really good one. We have underwater Sagittarias. These are like the duck potatoes. Leaf shape can actually depend on a lot of different conditions, including nutrients, species, genetics, because a lot of them hybridize. They form what's called the species complex. And they will, when accidentally sprayed with like Roundup specifically, this is one of the few plants that can survive that. They'll thin out their leaves, and I've noticed they change their morphology, or their plasticity is what we call it in science. It will actually change the way they look to resist more herbicide applications in the future. It's kind of a weird thing that I've noticed just in the field, but that I've only noticed in Sagittaria graminia and Sagittaria lancifolia. And I can't confirm that that is common throughout all species. Oh, I was done like 20 minutes ago. I'm just rambling until y'all took me off the stage. Didn't I say that? Thank you, Elliot.
Thank you so much, Sean. What do we all learn tonight? Hi. Cool. So, Sean will be our field trip leader we're doing a field trip this Saturday at Wetland Park. And he's gonna be walking us through the restoration that he's done at that area, specifically around the lake, right? That you've done.
Grant Lake, and we meet at downtown, right next to Oak and Stone. There's only one big dock and one big downtown area, and I'll have a big sign.
Okay, big
Yes,
sign.
it's on you.
Meet at the Oak and Stone. So that's this Saturday, and they're meeting at 9 a.m. So far, I think we have 21 people signed up, so there's still like 9 more spots open. You guys can sign up on Meetup if you want to. But it should be really interesting, especially seeing how native plants are incorporated in developments like Wetland Park. A couple other events we have, and then I'll let you guys go. So our holiday party is coming up in December, specifically December 15th, and it's going to be at the Celery Fields at the Nature Center. So instead of our Monday meeting being here in December, it'll actually be at Celery Fields. We do it every year. It's really fun. We have a gift exchange. You can pay a limit of $20 for a nature-themed gift. There's a potluck, so there'll be food as well. And it's a good time to meet other people and just kind of like have community and talk about native plants and other fun stuff. So that is December 15th at 6:30 at Celery Fields. And you can sign up for that on Meetup or just show up and we're happy to have you. And then lastly, our next field trip after Wetland Park is going to be on December 20th with one of our members, Zach Westmark. He's a ranger at Mayaca State Park, and he's going to take us on an interpretive walk through Mayaca State Park. It's just a casual kind of walk right before Christmas. So anybody that wants to come for that, you can sign up on Meetup as well. Cool, so that's all I have. There is, Sean brought some plants and his books as well. So the plants are being auctioned off. Any book sales, he's generously offered 50% of the proceeds to go to the chapter. And then there's also some free milkweed seed, aquatic milkweed seeds back there too. So we'll give 2 more minutes on the auction and then we'll close it, but that's it. So thanks everybody.
Yeah.